University.
This week on Office Hours, the Occupy Wall Street movement has spread to cities and towns around the country, as well as to the Duke campus. The demonstrations have initiated debates about capitalism and democracy and what the purpose of the protest should be. Professor Robert Korstad will discuss how the current Occupy efforts can be understood in light of past social movements such as Vietnam War teach-ins, anti-apartheid campaigns, and post-World War I bonus army protests. Korstad takes your questions on Occupy Wall Street and the history of social movements.
I'm James Todd with Duke's News Office, and I am here with Robert Korstad, a professor of history and public policy at Duke Sanford School of Public Policy, and also Anastasia Karklina, a Duke sophomore and a participant in the Occupy Duke demonstration going on right now on campus. Professor Korstad, it's a simple question. What is it? But people don't necessarily agree. What is Occupy Wall Street and all these related activities?
Well, I think it's a movement by a lot of different people about issues of economic justice and democracy in the United States. And it's started off in Wall Street. It's spread around the country. I think it's gotten a lot of energy from the protests and the kinds of movements like this that have been going on across the world, particularly in the Middle East this year. So I think that there's a certain amount of continuity about the issues, about the frustrations of large numbers of people in our society, just as there have been in other places.
And so you're a historian. What are some helpful comparisons from the past to better understand what's going on now?
Well, I think occupying space, whether it's public space, workspace, commercial space, is actually a very traditional form of protest in the United States. We can go back just over the last 100 or so years. Coxey's Army, which is in the late 1890s, which was a movement, I don't know, 40,000 or so people, I think, maybe not, in Washington who are unemployed, protesting the economic recession of the late 1890s, which is in many ways similar to the one we're in. The Bonus Army March in 1932, a lot of World War I vets who were promised a bonus in 1945 came to Washington to get it. They wanted it earlier. They were unemployed. They were in the midst of the Depression. The General Motors sit-down strike, 1937, the sit-ins in Greensboro, Civil Rights Movement, protests against the Vietnam War, the divestiture campaign about South Africa. So I think there's a long history, and we're seeing just a moment of that in which occupying space, drawing attention to these issues, it's part of an American way of protest.
A lot of comparisons. Anastasia, the Occupy Duke encampment is real prominent right out there in Chapel Quad. I think people are curious why Occupy Duke.
Well, Occupy Duke started with a few students and myself coming to join Occupy Durham in CCB Plaza downtown. And it started with us going there and sort of participating in this community gathering, hearing a lot of community members talk about pressuring issues that they wanted to come to discuss. But the issues that we faced was that there were not a lot of Duke students present there. So we felt that there was lack of this dialogue, and considering the media blackout that was present, there was not much discussion going on. So Occupy Duke started as a platform for discussion, and that's what Occupy Duke is about. Occupy Duke is about creating an open, participatory, democratic space where people, not only Duke students and faculty, which is our traditional way of interaction, but also employees and staff that work here and serve us every single day, can come together and talk about these issues. So we are a very accepting place and very, participatory. We seek to bring these opinions and different opinions together to talk about pressing socioeconomic issues.
Okay, and as you both know, we're taking questions from viewers. We've already got one that's come in here from Nancy by email, and she has a question for each of you. So starting with you, Professor Korstad. Okay. She says, lots of people have been comparing the Occupy Wall Street movement and the Tea Party in different ways. Does your reading of the relevant history suggest that OWS will move the Democrats leftward as the Tea Party movement moved the Republicans rightward?
Well, I don't know. It depends on people in the Democratic Party. I don't think the intent of the Occupy Wall Street is necessarily to influence the Democratic Party. I think it's trying to raise these issues for all Americans and in both political parties. I think part of the problem is this sense of gridlock in Washington that politicians who have a much lower, I mean, the members of Congress have a much lower popularity rate than the president does, and I think it's it's trying to wake them up. These are real serious issues. The kind of political infighting that's going on is not an answer to the problems of that people are facing. So I don't think that comparison is exactly right.
And Anastasia, Nancy's question for you is, does the Occupy Duke encampment bear any similarities to K-ville? Of course, she's talking about the student practice of tenting for basketball seats. What's similar and what's different from a student perspective?
I guess the main similarity is that we are trying to occupy and maintain a physical space. So part of Occupy Duke main reason is to bring a dialogue to campus discussion. And I was talking to you before saying that tenting is not necessarily the main part of what we're trying to achieve. But tenting as a part of Occupy Duke is the creation of this physical space where people can come together. So in that sense, I feel like it's similar and sort of following tradition of University of camping out every year. But the difference is that our cause is sort of different from, it's not getting tickets for a basketball game rather than trying to challenge and trying to discuss and intellectually engage with issues of injustice and inequality. So I think that's the main difference, the cause why we're there. And we think if Duke community can spend, a month in winter to camp out for basketball tickets, we actually, all of us need to some sort of engage in this dialogue and contribute our opinions to it.
Professor Korstad, you mentioned income disparity. I saw a tweet this morning from a J.P. Barlow on the whole OWS tag. One graph from the New York Times shows why this is happening, and he points to an income disparity graph over time and says, 2007 you have high disparity, back to 1928, the eve of the Depression. Is that a good, again, historical comparison?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence that this kind of income inequality and wealth inequality is a factor in the recession itself and in the kind of economic condition that we find ourselves in. So I think looking back at that particular time, this is similar. I mean, we've had we had a long period starting with the Depression. In which the income disparity, got much tighter. And then over the last really 30 years, I think since the late 1970s until just recently, it's gone back to those.
Congressional Budget Office report just out on that.
Yeah, showing that, basically all of the economic gains and productivity and wealth generation over the last 30 or 35 years or so has gone to this very small percentage of people, and that while all incomes have grown somewhat, the top 1% has grown many more times than others. So I think this is an issue of great concern, and I think it's as people are suffering in the country, they're seeing a small group of people with this incredible kind of wealth.
Anastasia, does that ring true in terms of the people who are participating in Occupy Duke as a motivating factor?
Definitely, I think so, because talking about demographics of Occupy Duke, we do have students from a variety of economic backgrounds, and I think that's also true for the larger Duke community. So part of it is looking and educating ourselves about these changes in economy and why these changes occur. And our main point is that we don't have answers. We have a lot of questions, but we hope to utilize the space that Occupy Duke created to find these answers together as a community together.
And so we've got a question that's come in along those lines, and I want to remind everybody watching that you're invited to participate in this office hours conversation. You can do that by email, you can do it by Twitter, and you can do it by Facebook. So here's a question that came in from Jack by email, And he asks, how plausible is it for Duke University students to be involved in the Occupy movement? Aren't many of them the sons and daughters of the 1% that the Occupy movement is protesting?
Well, I guess that's something that we've discussed a lot as part of our discussions within our group, and also receiving criticism from other members of this community. And part of the response that I think would be reasonable is that, assuming that demographics of Duke community are only limited to 1%, or to people who own a lot of wealth, is sort of creating a very stereotyped and homogeneous image of Duke University, just because myself and a lot of members of Occupy Duke are on very generous financial aid. And it's also forgetting about how Duke is generous in allowing students who would otherwise not be able to be here to come here and pursue this education. So our demographics, our groups are really very diverse, and we have students who are on very generous financial aid and their parents don't earn as much income as other top 1% students. And part of Occupy Duke is about that, bringing those together and acknowledging by being in this university, the institution, all of us are privileged. No matter what your economic family background is, we're already privileged by receiving this education. So we might as well use the facilities, the resources in terms of faculty, library, students that we have here to sort of discuss these issues. And that's why I think we're trying to engage in this question, but in the end, we all are privileged by being here.
I think one thing too is that even people in the 1% are affected in very negative ways by the economic recession, the kinds of problems that we're having in the country right now, and so it's not this is not an effort to kind of pit one group of people against another, but I think it's a very insightful and clever way of raising a set of issues about fairness, about justice, about equality, and also what's good for the nation and what's good for the economy. I don't think over the long run having a small group of people having control over that much wealth and having access to the political power that wealth buys is in the nation's best interest, and it's certainly not in the traditions of a kind of a representative democracy. And I think that's one of the issues that people are as concerned about as anything, is that there's this sense that money is the only thing that buys access to political power and political influence these days. And I think there are a lot of people out there who don't see that as the kind of what this country was founded on.
You've both been talking about raising discussion and dialogue, and we actually had the Duke Student Broadcasting Group went out on campus and got some reactions to that. So I want to listen to those and then get your reactions, have a little dialogue. Let's listen to the Duke Student Broadcasting.
I've seen the Occupy Duke stuff out by the chapel, but honestly I haven't really looked into what it means or what they're doing, so I really haven't been following it at all.
I don't really know what they're all about. I'd definitely like to hear more about it because I admire their commitment, but something I need to find out more about for sure.
Well, I appreciate the movement. I'm behind it 100%. And I think they're doing a great job fighting big business, ruling the government.
The whole idea of the government controlling top corporations is just idiotic.
We already have free Wi-Fi. What more do these people want?
I think it's really hilariously futile, especially given the complete support they have from the administration. Like, nothing's going to change. I think everyone here at school just sort of thinks it's privileged college kids being privileged college kids, and I don't see what actual real change or new discussion they're going to foment that wasn't already there.
So Duke community members reacting to Occupy Duke, Occupy Wall Street, a little bit of everything in there, some pros, some cons, some apathy. Anastasia, your own experience with conversations, your reactions to what you just heard.
I think it's definitely an interesting piece, to just see the variety of opinions on campus. I think that as a space, Occupy Duke has been very welcoming and accepting, and we've been trying to do everything possible to sort of invite people by putting out a sign, come talk to us. And there's, the idea that there are always people on the quad in front of the camp engaging with people in dialogue. And I personally have witnessed and participated in a lot of discussions that have been going on there between students, between faculty and students, so on. So I think part of what the criticism that we've been receiving comes from unknowing, and not taking time to come and engage. Partially, I was very impressed and very pleased with the support from administration and their support of our right to express ourselves. So I think once we see this movement spreading across the country, spreading across to other countries in Europe, for example, and also our students camping out, I think we need to take time, to stop and think, why is this happening? What's going on? And what are these people trying to achieve? So I would encourage a lot of students just come and talk to us.
What do you hope people's reactions are? I mean, what are you trying to achieve? What sort of, in changing minds, what's the change you want to happen?
Personally, I have participated in discussion with people who have completely different opinions compared to majority of students on the site, on campsite, but nevertheless they come and talk to us. So right now we are in the process of organizing and programming different initiatives. So that would include study groups, reading groups, teach-ins outside, focus groups, discussion groups, roundtable discussions, and so on. So our initial goal is to create that dialogue and create that community space where people can come. And part of it also creating a community space for creative expression where a lot of people want to express themselves through dance, theater, arts, and try to foster social change through these ways.
Professor Korstad.
Well, I've been involved with a group called Faculty in Solidarity, and so we've put up a table there and have started gathering articles from lots of different perspectives for whoever wants to read. The students have created a People's Library, and so we've been contributing books. I took 2 books over yesterday afternoon that I've written on about North Carolina, one on the war on poverty in North Carolina, another on civil rights and labor union activity.
What are the names of the books?
One's Civil Rights Unionism and To Right These Wrongs are the 2 books. And because a couple students had asked me, well, you're from North Carolina, I'd really like to learn about these, how these issues have played out. We're here, we don't know that much about this history. So I think that, a couple of things. One is that I think this idea of this being primarily about education and discussion and dialogue is actually brilliant, because I think it's one of the most radical things that can be done in this country right now, is people actually talking and engaging and hammering out their ideas about the meaning of the country and what does it mean to be a democracy? What does democratic participation mean? What does economic justice mean? What kind of world do we want to live in? And not just leave it up to kind of market forces or political parties or politicians, but having people engaged in doing that. It seems to me that's what's going on at Duke, at least, and a lot of other places around the country. Is in it's in this long tradition of engagement of citizens, and I think it's really what needs to be done. Now, I was over there a couple days ago, and a young man came up to the table, and he was an econ major, and he wanted to go to Wall Street. And then it turns out we started discussing issues, and he comes from a labor union family, and he's kind of he's on his way up in different ways, but he had a lot of really good questions, and I didn't have the answers to all of them either. I mean, we were talking back and forth to one another, and I think I've seen a lot of that going on, and I think people should go by, even if they don't agree with it or don't know what's going on, be curious. I mean, that's what a college campus is for, is curiosity and kind of, and they're doing a fabulous job.
We've got a few questions that have come in here, and I want to remind everybody watching that you're invited to participate in the conversation by email, by Facebook, or by Twitter. And so here's one from Rachel. I'm curious to know whether the Duke students are in contact with UNC students and others around the state. Do they see themselves as connected to other college students as a group? Do they have specific concerns as students? Do they have specific concerns related to Duke as an institution, or is their aim more national? I guess that's 3 questions.
We've been primarily connected to Occupy Durham just because we as a Duke community feel that there is an inevitable bond of Duke being a provider of employment for Durham community. So we feel that and that connection is sort of inevitable and needs to be discussed. And part of it is also involving Durham, members of the Durham community, our employees in this dialogue. So we haven't not been necessarily in direct contact with other Occupy movements around the country in terms of colleges, but we had few visitors. For example, yesterday was Occupy Columbia student visiting who shared his experiences in Columbia up in New York. And there's a movement starting, from what I'm hearing, in Chapel Hill and UNC. So part of Occupy Duke and our plans is also extending and reaching out to Occupy Durham and Durham community once we gain capacity and support on campus, and hopefully start this dialogue here.
We've got another question here that's come from Jim. Let me toss this to you, Professor Korstad. How clearly is the Occupy movement communicating its goals? Calling for an end to war is a clear goal, for instance. Where exactly is this call to action directed, and at what point would success be achieved?
Well, I think that one of the interesting things about the Occupy movement is it doesn't articulate any real specific goals that it's trying to accomplish. And I think at the beginning of a social movement like this, that's probably not a bad idea. It's more about raising awareness, getting the issues out on the table, getting people talking about them, getting more understanding about how war and economic instability and the concentrated political power are connected, for instance. What are the role of universities in this? I mean, Duke is an elite university. Well, elite means a particular thing. And what's the relationship of universities like Duke, the kind of training we give students, the preparation we give them? Are we doing the right kind of job for our country and for the rest of the world? So I think it's not about immediate goals. I mean, those will come as this movement develops and solidifies, if it does. So I think I think the things are at a good moment right now in terms of that.
Anastasia, you want to speak to communicating goals, at least for Occupy Duke?
Definitely. It's something that one point of criticism that we're facing, we've also been discussing, and that's something I wanted to address initially, the whole issue of no agenda. And initially, Occupy Duke was a product of General Assembly sort of meetings that we had prior to actual encampment. And all of these issues were discussed. So by a consensus, the decision was made that there would be no agenda to Occupy Duke, and that would be made purposefully, just because we want to create a space inclusive of all different ideas. And we want, specific demands or specific causes to be extensions and product of this encampment, of this space, where you can come, you can find, fellow classmates who share your passions, who share your interests, and then out of this community space, you could develop these demands. But as Professor has said, this is a new movement. It's been a few weeks, a little bit more than a month. So I think it's really demanding to expect some kind of sort of specific demands. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is a disadvantage or weakness of the movement. I think that it has an advantage of creating this open dialogue, open space for democratic discussions.
And speaking of the Occupy movement being nascent, there's an email question here that's come in from Mandy, who writes, in the past few weeks, I've read many articles where historians compare the Occupy Wall Street protests to historic social movements. Historians, yeah. Many of these historians have a tendency to make predictions about whether or not the OWS protests can and/or will be effective based on whether or not they resemble past social movements. But I wonder what's new and unique in the 21st century to this movement.
That's a good question. Well, I think the how rapidly it spread and the ability to use new forms of media and new forms of technology, not as a tool for doing that, I think has been very interesting. I think the fact that the movement is as kind of amorphous as it is also very interesting. I think if you look at a lot of social movements, they start with, or they can very, very quickly become kind of dominated by a small group of people who are, they form an organization, they form a leadership council. They begin to take control of that movement and direct it in particular ways. And in certain circumstances, that's absolutely necessary. I think in this case, it's kind of reacting and responding to the circumstances and the needs that are in front of us. And I think it's very difficult to predict. I was reading a couple of historians saying, how can you predict something like this? I mean, you couldn't have predicted the uprising in Eastern Europe, or the kind of quick overthrow of apartheid, or the things that have been going on in Libya and Egypt and other parts of the Middle East. So I think historians' job is not to make predictions based on the past, but it's to help us understand the context in which things are going on today as best we can.
Anastasia, does this feel like something new, or you're drawing on traditions, or a little bit of both?
I think some of it is also connected to us challenging the campus mindset, in talking about protest being a driving force for social change. So it's also talking about self-expression and definitely continuing tradition of activism on this campus and sort of trying to encourage it and reinforce it. I think that's examples that we were talking about, the last biggest protest in this campus was being against the Iraq War. So I think the protest is an inevitable part of social change, and as students and as young people, we have that duty to support it and to somehow bring it forward and move it forward.
We've got an interesting comment that's come in here by email, and I want to remind everybody watching that you're invited to participate in this conversation by email to live@duke.edu. You can tweet in a question with the tag Duke Live, or post one on the Duke University Facebook page. So Andrew writes, I worked for 5 years in New York finance after graduating from undergrad. I was happy to work hard and make handsome bonuses until I saw the devastation of the collapse, the systematic injustice. I quit my job to get a graduate degree here at Duke in hopes of contributing to the promotion of a more just and sustainable economic system. He hasn't had economic hardship, he says, but he stands with the 99, stands with Occupy Duke. So what about this, the sort of responsibility of the 1%, if you will, that that it could be wealthy people, high-income earners supporting Occupy Wall Street?
Well, I think that's not a totally uncommon response. I mean, I think I've been teaching here for 20 years, and I've had a lot of students who've gone off and worked at Goldman Sachs or other places, and a lot of them last a couple years, and they work really hard. They make a lot of money. They save it, but ultimately, they have concerns about whether that's the kind of life they want to lead, or what they're doing is really of social good, and they often come back and go to graduate school, or they do something else with their life, maybe something that they wanted to do all along, become a teacher, work overseas for a humanitarian organization. I think there's as I said earlier, people in the top 1% are affected by the things that are going on in the country, and I don't think it's I think it's in their self-interest to pay attention to.
And I completely agree to that. And partially as a human rights advocate, I do believe that initially we're all human, and there can be a concern of 1% or 99%. Initially, essentially, this is a common issue. It's a collective issue. It doesn't concern only the United States, but also just generally the world we live in. And part of my experience is something that made a really great impression with me was my first trip to Occupy Durham, and seeing so many people from different backgrounds coming. And one experience that I had is seeing a young boy, a Latino boy, coming there to represent his father, who was not able to be there because of his 2 jobs. And in contrast to that, coming a woman who was an owner of a corporation and who came out to Occupy Durham because she was concerned. So I think I completely agree to that. I think it's a really collective problem of a society we live in, and just trying to understand that we live in a system that is interconnected, and we all are connected in one way or another.
We've been touching on this international dimension of the Occupy movement, and I guess some people would draw that connection more strongly than others. And interesting, Anastasia, you're from Latvia, so you're from Europe. So thoughts on that, the Occupy movement here in the U.S., Arab Springs, or other protests in Europe and in South America. What connections do you draw there?
I think there was a lot of criticism sort of creating that parallel between Arab Spring and the United States, and what's been happening with Occupy Wall Street. But I think in general for me it's inspiration of having this power of people who are going out and speaking out and voicing their disagreement. So part of it has been really inspiring to see all of these movements, come to be in this year around the world. And part of it also, a lot of Occupy Duke students are international students, actually a really big part of them. It's just because staying here in the United States has become our home, at least for the next 4 years that we are at Duke. And taking ownership of these problems is also very important, I think.
Why is that? Why are a number, I didn't know that are international students participating in Occupy Duke?
Actually, pretty large number of them, pretty large percentage of them, and me being an international student. And I've seen a lot of international students actually take initiative and great passion for this cause, even though their homes are everywhere, from Europe, Middle East, Africa. So people are really, even on this campus, standing up and trying to advance these causes, because I think essentially the main reason or the main purpose that people are out there is giving voice to people and giving them the right to voice their opinions and sort of to try to challenge the existing order, voice their opinions, and communicate with people around this campus.
I think certainly the issues of poverty, income inequality, the lack of political democracy are international issues. And the United States has supposedly a nation, trying to lead the rest of the world in the pursuit of these goals. And so I think it's fabulous to have to make the connection between what's going on in here and what's going on in other places, because there is a sense in which people are responding to similar kinds of grievances, and they're acting in collective ways that are similar. And I think in a lot of ways they have the same kind of goals, long-term goals in mind, in which they're trying to better the conditions for themselves and their families and their children. So. It's all of these things are connected. I mean, one of the problems that we're facing in this country is the whole challenge of globalization. One of the reasons we have high unemployment and the wealth gap is because we've lost, millions really of manufacturing jobs. In North Carolina, we've lost 3 or 4 industries in the last couple decades, and those jobs are going someplace else. So we have to begin to think about what kind of impact that has on us and also has on people in other places.
We've got a question that's come in right along these lines, and Jeffrey wants to know, would Occupy Wall Street be possible had we not seen the Arab world take the steps it had in Tunisia, Tahrir Square, and elsewhere?
Well, I'm sort of a believer, so I would hope that it would still be possible. But definitely, I think what we've seen in Arab Spring and what happened in Tunisia and Egypt is a great inspiration. But at the same time, I think we should not forget that there are other places in the Middle East that haven't received the same coverage, like Yemen, for example. And so I think it's a great inspiration. And I do feel, when you go, I've personally been to Occupy Wall Street a few weeks ago, and when you pass by one of the food vendors, you can see the sign that says from Tahrir Square to Wall Street, so I think it definitely has been an inspiration. I'm more skeptical of the, circumstances that it happened, because we need to remember the historical background of Egypt and the political background of having a dictatorship, same in Libya. So I think in the United States we're acting in a little bit of different political context, and I think that's the difference that should be discussed. But as speaking to people standing up, I think it's a great connection between the two.
What about some of the limits of the comparisons of these protests? I mean, say what you want about American government. We're not under a strongman dictatorship here,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and you can look at the different kinds of responses around the country to the Occupy movements. In Oakland and last night in Atlanta, the authorities have responded very differently than they have in New York and certainly at Duke and Chapel Hill and other places. So, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think looking at and we have to take advantage of that. We do live in a country where there are a lot of freedoms. We have, we have access to the internet. We have access to information. We're able to hopefully challenge our leaders and to voice dissenting opinions. And so we need to stand on that. Those are hard-fought gains that people in this country, they just didn't appear. All these rights didn't appear. We had to fight for them. The right to vote, the right for public expression, the right for education, and for me, this is this is really a continuation of an ongoing battle in the United States for real democracy and for real economic opportunity.
And so we've got a question that's come in along these lines of sort of what's right with America. Sarah asks, what about America's history of capitalism? Is greed ever good? What's the role of the marketplace?
Certainly the market and the marketplace has a role to play in our economic system. But in the same way that we don't let people walk into an assembly and yell fire, or there are limits to what individuals can do. We live in a democracy. We're a collective. We have social responsibilities to one another, and I think we have to make real kinds of decisions. So this idea that somehow you just stand back and it's just all a free-for-all, or this is some kind of social Darwinist world, and that there's nothing we can do about it. We just have to get out of the way is very simplistic thinking, I think. And so we have to, as a nation, decide, well, what is the right tax rate? What is an adequate education for all our people? What kind of political system do we want to live in? Those are choices that we can make. We don't have to be, it's not a determinist world, from my perception.
And I think that's generally like capitalism in the system we live in, like was discussed in Occupy Duke as well, and something that interesting debates that happen around it. And I think that's the asset of having international students being part of this movement, because there is a variety of opinions about it, and I think that's something that the discussion that we're trying to foster. And part of Occupy Duke, you would find a lot of students who have socialist values at heart, and we think that's totally fine, and we want to bring these students and talk to them,
And that's a criticism is, these Occupy movements are socialist. Is that fair?
I don't think that's fair at all, because I think that's something that's very simplistic and radical to say. I definitely think that it is a place for people with completely different values to come, and some of us, for example, I come from Eastern Europe, where government is democratic but has a lot of socialist elements, and I think just trying to discuss these issues, like should healthcare be provided by government, should it be free, what people who don't have access to healthcare or don't have enough wealth to have access to healthcare, what do they do? I think those are important issues that it's not only the issues that are particular to the United States, but it's something that we should engage in a global context, especially considering the significant role that the United States have in shaping the developing world, for example, and shaping other economies outside of this country. So I think that's something that we've been discussing, and something that we're actually encouraging, challenging the system. Do we live in the system? Do we want to live in the system? And what kind of system do we want to live in? How do we want to change it, if at all?
Yeah, I think, capitalism and democracy come in lots of different shapes and forms. If you look in Europe, Western Europe, there are capitalist societies that are very democratic, where the kind of wealth inequality and income inequality, the gaps in education don't exist, because people have made different kinds of decisions about what the social good is and how social resources should be distributed and allocated. So I think that's a kind of a false argument. It's between capitalism and socialism. I think that there's a spectrum here that we're talking about, and we're in terms of wealth inequality, the United States is comparable to some of the most underdeveloped countries in the world right now. And is that where we want to be? We have the capacity through public policy and through our political system for changing that. Well, is that what do we want? And that seems to me to be a decision that not just a small group of people should be making.
We've got at least one more question from a viewer here I want to get to, and this is from Swapanthi, who asks, what do you make of the disparate reactions on the part of the media, law enforcement, public officials, etc., to the Tea Party protests of the last few years and to Occupy Wall Street? I guess they're different in character is at least part of it, and there's probably a reference there to both in Atlanta and Oakland with there being police clearing encampments. But as you said, that's not been the case with every Occupy movement site.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I think the media, it covers things in particular ways, and so if it's, I don't know why they do it exactly the way they do it, and I think politically there's they're different. These are different constituencies, and if you look in people coming from different kind of power bases, they have different kinds of goals. So I think that public officials are going to react differently.
I think that media coverage is a very interesting topic in relation to Occupy Wall Street movement, because in first few weeks of Occupy Wall Street, you couldn't find information anywhere apart from Facebook and Twitter. So that's also, I think, issue of transparency, an issue of censorship that we as Occupy Duke also willing to discuss on this campus. So I think it is very important, and there are different reactions, as you said. There was a raid on Occupy Oakland, which was a very sort of example of very violent suppression, in my opinion, of public protests, of expression of public dissent. But then again, we also read few opinions of North Carolina Senator who suggested that Occupy, I think it was Occupy Asheville, but I'm not really sure, that they were paid to do that. So I think we have really variety of different reactions in how people perceive the movement in the media.
Speaking of Occupy Oakland, news this morning was that Occupy Oakland is starting to call for a general strike November 2, next Wednesday. Is that a direction Occupy Duke might go in, and is that a good direction, a strike? I mean, it's more in line with the labor movement.
I guess here I'm expressing just my personal opinion, even though I have some impressions of the General Assemblies that we had and sort of the feeling of and opinions of our members. But I definitely think that Occupy Duke at the moment is really focusing on creating the space for dialogue, first of all. So, and we really want to have, as I already said before, have this as a community gathering space rather than, falling into some extremes, rather than want to involve people who don't disagree with the movement. But again, it's only my personal opinion. So Occupy Duke is shaped by its members just because we function as a horizontal organization. That means that there are no leaders, there are only organizers. And every single person who joins Occupy Duke or comes to our space has an equal say in making the decisions. So it's hard for me to predict something.
Yeah, I think historically general strikes take quite a bit of organizing if they're going to be successful. It's a tremendous way of showing solidarity, among groups of people or across different groups of people. Seems to me to be, just from a historical perspective, to be pretty premature at this point, and I think it would be hard to imagine that being successful. I mean, I can see, as this goes, months and months down the line, I can see some national kinds of protests or some larger national gatherings being something that could really happen. But I think this is it's still in its infancy as a social movement. We need to kind of see where it's going.
Good. Well, you've both been quite generous with your time. As a wrap-up question here. There's this Twitter tag, I am the 53, so this comes from a tax policy study that says that estimates 47% of Americans don't pay taxes, so this was sort of the response to the Occupy Wall Street. If you were to tweet at somebody, have a dialogue with someone in the I am the 53 camp, what would you say? How would you start that conversation?
Well, good for you. I mean, you've got, there's a reason why people don't pay taxes. They don't have enough money. They don't make high enough wages. They don't have jobs. It's not that, we've created this tax system or tax structure where people at the bottom don't pay their fair share. They pay it in sales taxes. They pay it in They pay it in all kinds of different ways. They pay tax in different kinds of ways. They may not pay income tax, but the primary reason they're not paying income tax, and I think this is the heart of the problem here, is that their wages aren't high enough. They don't have permanent jobs. They're spending huge amounts of their money on health care costs for their families. And what we need to do is create an economy and a society where everybody makes enough money so they do have to pay taxes. That's the kind of world I want to live in.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also just referring back to what you said about this being like 1% versus 99%, or including 53% into that discussion. I think something that I really liked from the video of student response that I've seen is the line, "I am 100%," essentially. Mm-hmm. So I think that 100% of the population should be involved in this dialogue, should be involved in this movement, just because it's concerned every single of us. That's how I see it. Even outside of this country, inside this country, it's 100% who should be shaping the way the country is run and the way the system is working.
Great. Anastasia Karklina, Duke sophomore and a participant in Occupy Duke. Thank you for taking time to answer questions here on Office Hours.
Thank you.
And Professor Robert Korstad, Professor of Public Policy and History here at Duke Stanford School of Public Policy. Thank you for taking questions.
Thank you, James. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. You can catch a recording of this video along with many other Duke videos on Duke On Demand. That's ondemand.duke.edu.